Imagine a country that just pulled off an absolute economic and social miracle. Like, we are talking about a nation that vaulted from the total collapse of a centrally planned empire right into the absolute highest echelons of global human development.
Yeah, a complete transformation.
Right, a place that at one point actually hit #1 in the entire world for gender development. It looks like the ultimate blueprint for a modern, equitable society.
On paper, absolutely.
But then you apply a new analytical filter to their data, a filter that measures what we call the Earth debt, which is the physical and ecological cost of all that amazing progress. And instantly, this utopian success story just shrinks by a staggering 16.1%.
Which is a massive, massive drop.
It's huge. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a massive stack of data with you, specifically the Lithuania versus Global Human Development Comparative Study. And this covers the years 1990 to 2023. And looking through this data set, it really forces us to ask you, the listener, a deeply uncomfortable question. Is high human civilization, the kind of progress we all strive for, strictly reliant on maxing out the planet's credit card?
It's really the defining developmental paradox of our time. I mean, to really understand how Lithuania achieved this so-called miracle and why the bill for it is so incredibly high, we can't just look at standard GDP.
Right, gross domestic product just doesn't cut it anymore.
Exactly. GDP is just too blunt of an instrument. It tells you how much money is moving, but it doesn't tell you who has it, how long they live to spend it, or, what it costs the planet to actually generate it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you want to know if a society is actually functioning for the people living in it, you need a much more sophisticated set of metrics, right?
You do. And this comparative study essentially uses a 5-dimensional radar chart to track Lithuania over these 33 years.
A 5-dimensional chart. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So it starts with the baseline, which is the HDI, or Human Development Index. That just measures health, education, and wealth.
Got it. The basics.
Right. Then it splits that data by gender to check for fairness, which is the Gender Development Index, or GDI.
Yep.
After that, it measures the structural, physical barriers that women face. So things like maternal mortality and parliamentary representation. That's the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Which is super important because, averages can be really misleading.
Exactly. And the study doesn't stop at averages. It applies an inequality filter, the IHDI, to see how much of a nation's progress is hoarded by the top 1% versus what's actually shared by the working class.
Okay, so that's 4. What's the 5th lens?
The 5th one is the kicker. As you mentioned in the intro, it applies the planetary pressure filter, the PHDI. This tracks carbon emissions and the literal physical mass of the Earth a nation extracts to sustain its lifestyle.
The physical weight of their progress.
Yeah. And when you layer these 5 dimensions over Lithuania's history since 1990, a really fascinating, deeply complex narrative emerges.
So let's actually go back to 1990, because to truly grasp the shock of that 16% environmental penalty at the end of this story, you first have to understand the sheer scale of the mountain Lithuania climbed.
Oh, it's a mountain.
Right. In 1990, the world is fundamentally changing. The Soviet Union is fracturing, and Lithuania takes this massive, unprecedented risk. They become the first Soviet republic to declare independence.
Stepping out into a complete economic void.
Literally a void.
Yeah.
But looking at their baseline HDI in 1990, it sits at 0.745, which honestly, that actually surprised me. That is significantly higher than the global average at the time, which was hovering around 0.601.
Yeah, that initial 1990 score, it really reflects the heavy Soviet investment in standardized public education and basic medical infrastructure.
So they weren't starting from scratch.
No, not at all. They weren't starting from an agrarian pre-industrial baseline. They had high literacy rates and an established grid of hospitals. But the system sustaining that infrastructure was structurally bankrupt.
Right. It was running on fumes.
Exactly. The real story is the trajectory from that starting point. Over the next 33 years, Lithuania undergoes this complete societal metamorphosis. They drive that 0.745 up to a staggering HDI of 0.895 by 2023.
And just to anchor that in reality for you listening, the global average today has only crawled up to 0.756. So Lithuania hasn't just grown alongside the rest of the world.
No, they've vastly outpaced it.
They have lapped the global average multiple times. They're currently sitting at 40th in the world, firmly entrenched in the very high human development tier.
Yeah, they engineered an escape velocity that very few post-Soviet states managed to achieve. But to appreciate the architecture of that 0.895 score, we have to look closely at the early 90s.
Because it wasn't a smooth ride up.
Not even close. It was not a linear ascent.
Yeah, I'm staring at the economic and developmental data from the early 90s. And there is a terrifying cliff right at the beginning of their independence. In 1994, their HDI actually drops backwards.
The transformation pains.
Right. It falls from 0.745 down to 0.699. And the economic data for that specific year is just brutal. The gross national income, the GNI per capita, plummets to just $10,783.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear economists talk about, transition periods, but numbers on a spreadsheet don't scream. A drop like that means a society is fundamentally breaking down.
It is a vital piece of the historical puzzle. What the data captures in 1994 is the agonizing reality of moving from a centrally planned command economy to an independent free market system literally overnight.
It's just hard to fathom.
Well, think about it. During the Soviet era, Lithuanian factories were producing goods, electronics, textiles, heavy machinery for a guaranteed closed market that stretched all the way to Siberia.
Right, the state ordered the goods.
The state ordered the goods, set the prices, and guaranteed the jobs.
And then suddenly the borders go up.
The borders go up, the guaranteed contracts vanish, and the supply chains just disintegrate.
Wow.
Imagine a factory in Vilnius that relied on cheap, subsidized fuel from Russia and parts from Belarus. Suddenly, it finds itself cut off. It's forced to buy resources at global market prices while trying to sell outdated goods to a Western market that doesn't even want them.
That's a recipe for disaster.
And it was. The result is hyperinflation. The savings of an entire generation are wiped out in a matter of months. State-owned enterprises are rapidly privatized, which leads to massive structural unemployment.
Which was a concept that theoretically didn't even exist under the prior regime, right?
Exactly. It was a complete shock to the system.
It's like, imagine trying to rip out and completely replace the entire electrical grid of your house while you are still trying to live inside it during a freezing winter.
That's a great way to put it.
You lose power, you lose heat, the walls are torn open. You just have to hope the new wiring works before you freeze to death.
That captures the human vulnerability perfectly. The social safety net evaporated exactly when the population needed it most, and we see this reflected immediately in the health pillar of the HDI.
Oh, right, the life expectancy data.
Yeah. In 1990, Lithuanian life expectancy was 71.4 years, but during that early 90s crash, the life expectancy visibly dips.
Which is just wild to think about, an entire country's life expectancy shrinking.
It is the physical manifestation of immense societal stress. You have dietary collapse, the sudden lack of imported pharmaceuticals, the stress of poverty, and the total disruption of preventative health care.
But, and this is the crazy part, the new electrical grid did eventually turn on, because the healing process over the next few decades is phenomenal.
It really is.
By 2023, their life expectancy rebounded beautifully to 76.0 years. That comfortably beats the current global average of 73.4 years.
It did. Though we should note the resilience of that system was tested recently. If you look at the 2021 data, there's a sharp divot where life expectancy drops down again.
Down to 74.2 years, I think it was.
Yes, exactly.
And that's obviously the global COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly. What you're seeing there is the excess mortality from the virus. I mean, almost every nation on Earth took a hit in 2020 and 2021. But what distinguishes a highly developed nation from a struggling one is the elasticity and institutional memory of its healthcare system.
How fast they bounce back.
Right. Lithuania's medical infrastructure absorbed that historic shock, recalibrated, rolled out immense public health interventions, and within 2 years, bounced life expectancy right back up to 76.0.
That demonstrates deep systemic resilience.
Absolutely.
So the health pillar is undeniably strong. But when we transition to the education pillar, this is where Lithuania really starts to flex on the rest of the globe.
Oh, yeah. They are an absolute education powerhouse.
The mean years of schooling, meaning the average number of years an adult over 25 has spent in formal education, hit 13.6 years in 2023.
And the predictive metric is even more telling. The expected years of schooling for a child entering the Lithuanian system today is a staggering 16.5 years.
16.5 years.
Yeah. And the global expected average is just 13.0 years. Lithuania is essentially designing a society where it is a baseline expectation that youth will not only finish high school, but will spend significant state-supported time in university or advanced vocational training.
How do they manage that? I mean, you don't just magically add 3.5 years of higher education to a population's expected lifespan without some massive structural mechanism driving it.
It comes down to a deliberate national strategy. They started treating human capital as their primary natural resource.
Because they don't have, like, vast oil reserves or anything?
Exactly. No oil, no endless mineral wealth. Their competitive advantage in the European Union, which they joined in 2004, by the way, had to be a highly skilled, multilingual, adaptable workforce.
That makes total sense.
They achieved this by heavily subsidizing higher education, integrating deeply with European university networks like the Erasmus program, and maintaining a strong cultural reverence for academic achievement.
Which actually carried over and modernized from the pre-1990 era, right?
Right, they kept the good parts of the old system and modernized them.
Which completely explains the economic explosion that follows the trauma of 1994. Because once you combine a highly educated workforce, a stabilizing healthcare system, and full integration into the European free market, the economic engine just roars to life.
It does, it's a textbook recovery.
We mentioned that in 1994, their GNI per capita had crashed to about $10,700. But let's fast forward. By 2023, that number has skyrocketed to $41,916, measured in purchasing power parity.
And that purchasing power adjustment is key, too, because it means we aren't just looking at inflation, we are looking at real, localized buying power.
It is astronomical growth. Just to put it in perspective for you, $41,960 is more than double the global average, which sits at roughly $20,327 today.
Yeah.
They literally doubled the world average after starting from an economic collapse just 3 decades prior.
It is the definition of a developmental triumph. They stabilized their society, invested deeply in the minds of their citizens, and integrated into the global economy to generate immense world-class wealth.
But I want to push back on these averages for a second.
Sure.
Because getting wealthy on average is great, but averages can hide incredibly dark secrets.
They absolutely can.
If you and I are sitting in a coffee shop and a tech billionaire walks in, on average, the three of us are incredibly wealthy.
Right, but that average doesn't help you pay your rent.
Exactly. So we have to ask, are a few post-Soviet oligarchs or tech founders skewing this Lithuanian data? Or is this new $41,000 per capita wealth actually reaching the people on the street?
That skepticism is exactly why the inequality-adjusted HDI, the IHDI, was created.
The fairness engine.
Exactly. High human development means absolutely nothing for social stability if only 5% of the population is enjoying it. The IHDI acts as a fairness filter. It calculates the HDI, but then it penalizes the score based on how unevenly the health, education, and income are distributed across the population.
So how much of Lithuania's progress is an illusion of averages? When you run their glowing .895 score through the fairness filter, what happens?
Well, it drops, as all nations do. Their HDI drops from .895 down to .812.
Okay, so that drop represents the value or the human potential loss to societal unfairness.
Yes. But context is everything here. That drop represents an overall loss rate of only 9.3%.
Which sounds low.
It is incredibly low. And to understand how impressive that is, you have to look at the rest of the world. The global average loss to inequality is a staggering 22.00%.
Wow. Let me pause on that. Globally, almost a quarter of all human development, a quarter of the health, wealth, and education we have built as a species is essentially wasted, locked away behind walls of unfair distribution.
Yes. The global system leaks a massive amount of human potential due to structural unfairness. It is like trying to carry water in a bucket with a giant hole in the bottom.
But Lithuania's bucket is remarkably sealed.
Very sealed. A 9.3% loss places them among the most egalitarian societies on Earth.
What makes their bucket so watertight? Where are they succeeding where the rest of the world is leaking so badly?
Well, the data breaks down that 9.3% loss across the 3 pillars. And the losses in health and education are incredibly minor. The inequality loss in education is just 2.0%.
Wow.
And in health, it is just 4.1%.
Wait, 2% inequality in education. That means practically everyone, regardless of whether they are born in a rural farming village or the center of the capital city, has the exact same access to those 16.5 years of expected schooling.
It points to a profoundly equal public school system and highly accessible higher education. They aren't leaving their lower-income demographics behind in underfunded school districts.
That's incredible.
The funding and quality of instruction are remarkably consistent across geography, and the same principle applies to their health sector. A mere 4.1% loss indicates a robust, universal healthcare system.
Right, so life-saving interventions, preventative care, and chronic disease management aren't strictly gated by personal wealth.
Precisely.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This raises a massive red flag for me in the data.
Ah.
Yeah. If education is perfectly distributed at a 2% loss, and health is highly egalitarian at a 4% loss, why do they still have a 9.3% total loss? What is driving the rest of that penalty?
It is almost entirely driven by the third pillar, income. The income inequality loss sits at 20.4%.
Wait, so the schools are equal, the hospitals are equal, but the paychecks are not.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating disconnect.
Yeah.
If everyone is so highly educated and everyone has the same access to knowledge and health, why isn't the wealth spreading evenly?
To answer that, we have to look at the demographics of the workforce, and that naturally shifts our focus to the gender data.
Right.
Because when you drill down into who is getting educated and who is getting paid in Lithuania, you uncover a gender paradox that completely flips traditional global narratives on their head.
I have been waiting to get to this part of the data stack because it honestly blew my mind. We are talking about the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
Yeah.
And you noted earlier that Lithuania was ranking incredibly high here.
They weren't just high. From 2010 to 2012, Lithuania ranked #1 in the entire world on the Gender Development Index.
Number one.
They beat Norway, they beat Sweden, they beat Iceland. Their score peaked at 1.044.
Let's clarify that score for a second. A score of exactly 1.0 means absolute statistical parity between men and women across health, education, and income, right?
Correct. So a score over 1.0, like Lithuania's 1.044, means that the overall Human Development Index for women is actually higher than it is for men.
The women are outdeveloping the men.
Exactly.
And even today, looking at the 2023 data, they're sitting at 1.022, which still ranks them 11th globally. So this wasn't just a 3-year statistical fluke. It is a sustained social reality.
Yes.
What is driving this anomaly? Why are women scoring so much higher?
It comes down to an absolute supremacy in foundational human capital. Let's look at education first. Female expected schooling in Lithuania is an incredible 17.0 years. Male expected schooling is 15.9 years.
That's over a full year difference.
Women are staying in the educational pipeline more than a full year longer than men. They are earning more advanced degrees, pursuing specialized qualifications, and really just dominating university enrollment.
That is a huge gap in a modern knowledge economy. But I'm looking at the health gap, and it is even wilder.
The health data is where it becomes staggering. Female life expectancy in Lithuania is 80.7 years. Male life expectancy is only 71.2 years.
Wait, 80.7 versus 71.2.
Yes.
That is a 9.5-year gap. Women are living nearly a decade longer than men.
Almost a full decade.
Why? What is happening to the men in Lithuania? Are they working more dangerous jobs, or is there a systemic health failure?
Well, sociologists and demographers have studied this extensively across multiple post-Soviet starts. It is often referred to as the male mortality crisis.
Okay, what does that stem from?
The transition period we talked about in the 90s, the sudden economic collapse, the loss of structured, state-guaranteed employment, it hit male demographics incredibly hard.
Because their social identity was tied to being the breadwinner in heavy industries that suddenly vanished.
Exactly that. Men who had worked their whole lives in state-run manufacturing found their skills completely obsolete overnight.
That's devastating.
It led to a profound crisis of identity and purpose, which manifested in systemic public health issues. Immense psychological stress, exploding rates of cardiovascular disease, and significantly higher rates of substance abuse, particularly extreme alcohol consumption.
Right.
Furthermore, men historically engaged in much riskier occupational hazards and driving behaviors, and they engaged with the preventative healthcare system far less frequently than women.
And the women just adapted better to the transition.
Women demonstrated immense social resilience. They adapted to the new service, administrative, and knowledge-based economies much faster. They utilized the educational systems to reskill, and they maintained stronger community and healthcare ties.
So women are much better educated, and they live significantly longer to actually use that education in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have the GII data, the Gender Inequality Index, which measures structural barriers in reproductive health. How do they fare there?
Exceptionally well. They rank 24th globally with a GII of just 0.070, compared to a global average of 0.455. The structural and physical risks to being a woman in Lithuania are incredibly low.
Give us an example of that.
For example, maternal mortality is exceptionally low at just 9 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Just to give you guys some context on how good that is, the global average for maternal mortality is 216 deaths per 100,000.
It's a massive difference.
Lithuania has basically eradicated the mortal risk of childbirth through world-class prenatal and maternal care.
Mm-hmm.
How did they achieve a number that low?
That is actually one of the positive legacies of the previous system.
Yeah.
The Soviet model prioritized a massive, widespread grid of standardized maternal wards and pediatric clinics.
Ah, okay.
While the equipment in the 90s was outdated, the geographic accessibility was already there. When Lithuania integrated with Europe, they didn't have to build the clinics from scratch. They just had to modernize the technology and training within them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Combine that with a highly educated female population that actively seeks out early prenatal care, and you drive maternal mortality down to single digits.
It's a perfect synergy of infrastructure and education. And the adolescent birth rate data reflects that empowerment too, right? It's just 5.9 per 1,000 young women compared to a global average of 39.1.
Exactly. It proves that women in Lithuania have total control over their reproductive timelines. This allows them to complete those 17 years of education and enter the workforce on their own terms without being derailed by early, unplanned pregnancies.
And they do enter the workforce in massive numbers. I'm looking at the labor force participation rate, and the female rate is 58.5%.
Which is very close to the male rate of 66.5%.
Right. The participation gap is only 8%, compared to a global gap of over 25.6%.
They are highly active in the economy.
Okay, so here is the plot twist within the plot twist.
Let's hear it.
You have a demographic of women who are statistically guaranteed to be more educated than their male peers. They have immense reproductive freedom, they participate heavily in the labor force, and they will live a whole decade longer to accumulate wealth and seniority.
Right.
By every law of economics, they should be absolutely dominating the income pillar.
You would certainly hypothesize that, yes. But here is the income disconnect. Despite all of those immense structural and educational advantages, the female gross national income per capita in 2023 is $35,285.
Okay.
The male GNI per capita is $49,587.
They are making over $14,000 less a year.
Yep.
Imagine a system where you do everything right. You go to school a year longer, you get the advanced degrees, you take care of your health, you live 10 years longer, and your male peers who dropped out of school earlier and suffer from higher mortality rates are still taking home 14 grand more than you every single year.
It's glaring, isn't it?
What does that say about the invisible ceilings in the labor market?
The data starkly illustrates the difference between human capital and economic reward. Women in Lithuania have absolute supremacy in health and education, but they are completely unable to convert it into equivalent economic capital.
But why not? If it's not a lack of education and it's not a lack of labor force participation, where is the money going?
It is largely driven by deep-seated occupational segregation. Even in highly egalitarian societies, there is a persistent systemic trend where female-dominated sectors like public education, nursing, social work, and the humanities are valued lower by the market.
I see.
And therefore, they are paid significantly less than male-dominated sectors like logistics, heavy industry, construction, and corporate IT.
Wow.
A woman might have a master's degree in education and work 40 years as a highly effective teacher, while a man might have a vocational degree in logistics and out-earn her by a massive margin.
So the market basically values moving boxes higher than educating the next generation.
That's one way to look at it. Furthermore, even with exceptionally low maternal mortality and great reproductive timelines, the motherhood penalty still exists.
All right, taking time off.
Time taken out of the workforce for caregiving disproportionately impacts female earning trajectories, promotions, and wealth accumulation over a lifetime, even if they live to be 80.
That compounding interest of lost wages.
Exactly. And we see this lack of top-tier economic power reflected in political power as well. Despite all their social advantages, women only hold 28.4% of parliamentary seats in Lithuania, while the global average is 26.5%.
So they are just slightly above average in political representation, nowhere near parity.
Not even close.
So that perfectly answers my question from earlier. When we wondered why the inequality-adjusted HDI showed a 20.4% loss in income fairness, despite perfect educational fairness, this is it.
This is the missing puzzle piece.
The gender wage gap is a massive engine of that income inequality. The men are capturing the lion's share of the financial boom, even while the women capture the educational and health benefits.
It is a highly complex, slightly contradictory society. They have solved the foundational issues of human development, but they have not solved the market valuation of women's labor.
Let's summarize where we are. We've just traveled through 33 years of data. We watched Lithuania rise from the ashes of a collapsed Soviet economy and hyperinflation in 1994.
A phenomenal rise.
We saw them build an education system that is incredibly fair, a healthcare system that pushes life expectancy to 76, and an economy that doubles the global average at nearly $42,000 a head.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen them construct a society so advanced that women outlive men by a decade and spend 17 years in school. They have, by all classical metrics, conquered the concept of human development.
They have built the perfect house. The structural integrity of their human development is world-class.
Exactly. But here's where we have to drop the other shoe. We have to walk down into the basement of this perfect house, because nothing is free.
Nothing.
Who or what is paying the bill for all of this utopian progress?
This brings us to our fifth and final metric, the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI. This is the civilization filter, and this is where we calculate the hidden ecological cost of the Lithuanian miracle.
And the numbers are grim. When you apply the PHDI filter to Lithuania's 2023 data, that glowing, shiny HDI score of 0.895 plummets.
It crashes down to 0.751.
That is a brutal 16.1% reduction in their human development score.
It is a massive penalty. To give a comparative baseline, when the same environmental filter is applied to the global average HDI, it only drops from 0.756 to 0.680, which is roughly a 10.1% hit.
So Lithuania's planetary pressure penalty is far, far heavier than the global norm.
Significantly heavier.
So what does this all mean? Where's this massive 16.1% pressure coming from? Did they build this $41,000 per capita wealth by just burning endless coal and pumping smoke into the sky?
Actually, no. If we look at the raw environmental data, the narrative is surprisingly split. The PHDI measures two distinct things: carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint.
Okay, let's look at CO2 first.
In 1991, during the inefficient heavy industry days of the Soviet hangover, Lithuania was producing nearly 10 tons of CO2 per capita.
Which is really high.
But by 2023, through massive modernization, integration into the much cleaner EU energy grid, and shifting from heavy manufacturing to a more service-based economy, they have slashed that down to just 4.58 tons per capita.
And the global average for CO2 is 4.54 tons. So they are basically exactly average when it comes to carbon emissions.
Exactly. They cleaned up their act on greenhouse gases.
So why the massive 16.1% penalty?
Because of the second metric, the material footprint. This is where the data is truly off the charts, and it reveals the physical reality of their economic boom.
Explain what the material footprint actually is, because it's not a term we hear as often as carbon footprint. We all know what CO2 is, but what exactly makes up a material footprint?
The material footprint measures the sheer physical mass of the earth that a nation extracts, consumes, and imports to sustain its lifestyle and build its infrastructure.
Okay, give me some examples.
It tracks four main categories. First, biomass, the crops grown for food, the timber harvested for furniture and construction. Second, fossil fuels not just for burning, but the petroleum extracted to make plastics, fertilizers, and synthetics. Third, metal ores, the iron, copper, and rare earth metals mined to build the cars, the smartphones, and the power grid. And finally, non-metallic minerals, the staggering amounts of sand, gravel, and limestone cement used to physically build those perfect schools, hospitals, and highways.
So it is the literal physical weight of a country's consumption.
Yes.
Okay, so what is Lithuania's physical weight? How much of the earth are they consuming?
Well, in 1992, at the start of their journey, their material footprint was 10.79 tons per capita.
Okay, around 11 tons.
But as their wealth exploded, as they renovated their entire society to Western European standards, their consumption skyrocketed. By 2023, their material footprint hit a staggering 23.57 tons per person.
23.57 tons for every single man, woman, and child in the country every single year. Let's try to visualize that. A standard mid-sized car weighs about 1.5 tons. You are talking about the equivalent of extracting roughly 15 cars worth of raw earth materials per person annually, just to keep the Lithuanian lifestyle going.
It is an immense physical burden. And when you compare it globally, the average material footprint for a human being right now hovers around 12.71 tons.
Wow.
Lithuania is consuming the Earth's physical materials at nearly double the global average.
This is the sinkhole under the perfect house. It's like maxing out a high-interest credit card to do a complete top-tier home renovation. It looks amazing on the surface.
The curb appeal is great.
Exactly. The HDI numbers are spectacular. The gender equity in education is beautiful. The hospitals are saving lives. But the monthly interest payments, the nearly 24 tons of material extracted per person, are fundamentally unsustainable.
Completely unsustainable.
They are destroying the future to build the present. You can't just keep digging 23 tons of sand, metal, and biomass out of the ground forever.
The data tells a stark story. Lithuania's development model, while socially and economically highly successful, is deeply reliant on heavy material consumption.
Right?
They built those amazing egalitarian hospitals. They built the universities where women study for 17 years. And they generated that $41,000 per capita wealth by extracting and consuming the physical world at a rate that the planet simply cannot sustain.
Because the supply chains required to maintain a very high human development lifestyle are devastatingly material intensive.
That's the painful truth.
It makes you question everything we celebrated in the first half of this deep dive. Can we even celebrate their #1 GDI rankings or their incredible rebound in life expectancy if it requires tearing up 23.5 tons of the earth per person to achieve it?
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It feels like they cheated the system. They achieved human development by transferring the cost from the human population to the planet.
It is a profound philosophical question regarding modern development. Is it a true miracle if it has an expiration date?
That's the real question.
But before we condemn the Lithuanian model, there is one final, incredibly ironic data point in this study that we must discuss, because it reveals that Lithuania is not alone in this, and it exposes the fundamental flaw in how the world operates.
Right. The ranking paradox. I remember looking at this in the stack and just laughing at the dark irony of it.
It's quite something.
You would think that with a 16.1% penalty and consuming double the global average of materials, Lithuania's ranking on the world stage would absolutely plummet when you apply the environmental filter. They should fall down the global leaderboard.
Logically, yes, you would assume that. Pre-environmental filter, on straight HDI, Lithuania ranks 40th in the world.
Right?
When you apply the PHDI filter, their score drops by that massive 16.1%. But their global rank actually rises.
They jump up 9 spots.
Yes, to become the 31st most developed nation on Earth.
They lost 16% of their score and they moved up 9 places. How is that mathematically possible?
Because it exposes a dark tragicomedy about global sustainability. Lithuania's score went down significantly, but the only way their rank could go up is if the 39 countries that were ahead of them in human development, the Norways, the Switzerlands, the United States, the Germanys, were penalized even more heavily.
It's grading on a curve.
Exactly.
You failed the environmental test terribly, you dug a massive sinkhole under your house, but because the rich students ahead of you literally set the entire classroom on fire,
Right.
you still moved up to the top of the class.
The countries with the absolute highest human development scores have material footprints and carbon emissions that dwarf even Lithuania's 23.57 tons.
That is terrifying.
This highlights a grim reality of the 21st century. The current globally accepted model for elite human development is universally toxic to the planet.
There is currently no nation on Earth that has achieved a top-tier HDI score without incurring a massive ecological debt.
None. The entire paradigm of success is built on extraction.
Every single perfect house is built on a sinkhole. Look around your own life, your own city. We measure our success by growth, by our income, by the new highways, the seamless next-day delivery of electronics, the beautifully stocked grocery stores. But if we applied the PHDI filter to your neighborhood, to your lifestyle, how much of your success would vanish into the planetary pressure penalty? If Lithuania is losing 16% and moving UP the ladder, what is your country losing?
It forces a total reevaluation of what progress actually means. We have spent the last century defining progress as the accumulation of health, knowledge, and material wealth.
Right.
But as we look toward the future, the data clearly outlines a 3-part roadmap for Lithuania's second half, the next 30 years of their national journey. And it's a roadmap the rest of the developed world needs to follow as well.
Lay out the roadmap. How do they fix the foundation without tearing down the house they just spent 33 years building?
First, they must rigorously maintain their world-class gender and educational equity. That is their greatest human asset.
Keep the schools strong.
Yes. The fact that their women are so highly educated and long-lived is the foundational intellectual capital that will allow them to innovate their way out of this crisis.
Makes sense.
Second, they have to close that lingering 20.4% income inequality gap. They need to dismantle the occupational segregation and the invisible ceilings so that the $14,000 wage gap between men and women is erased. A truly equal society is more resilient and more capable of collective sacrifice and innovation.
And the third step, which is the hardest.
The third step is a desperate pivot toward a green transition. They have to completely decouple their economic wealth from that 23.57-ton material footprint.
Right, they can't keep digging.
They must figure out how to generate a $41,000 per capita income through circular economies, digital services, renewable energy grids, and sustainable infrastructure, rather than through sheer physical extraction and consumption. They have to learn how to be rich without being heavy.
Without being heavy, I love that.
Right.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over today. In just 33 years, we watched Lithuania completely rewrite its destiny.
They really did.
They transformed from a struggling, traumatized post-Soviet economy experiencing hyperinflation in 1994 into a highly equal top-tier nation where women outlive men by a decade, out-educate them at every turn, and maternal mortality is almost non-existent.
They engineered an absolute social and economic miracle in just 3 decades.
They proved that rapid systemic transformation is entirely possible for a nation when they invest in their human capital.
Exactly.
So here is the question for you to take away. If a society can engineer that much of a miracle for its economy and its people in 30 years, can they do it again for the climate?
That's the million-dollar question.
Can Lithuania and can we globally invent an entirely new kind of wealth that doesn't require digging up 23.5 tons of the earth to enjoy it? Can we fill in the sinkhole before the house collapses?
That is the defining challenge of our era, laid bare by the data.
I highly encourage you to go look up the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, of your own country. See what your Earth debt actually is. Look at the invisible cost of your own development. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the numbers with us. Until next time, keep questioning the foundation. Take care, everyone.